The Secret Science Behind Miracles by Max Freedom Long. Chapter 1. The Discovery That May Change the World. This report deals with the discovery of an ancient and secret system of workable magic which, if we can learn to use it, as did the native magicians of Polynesia and North Africa, bids fair to change the world, providing the atom bomb does not make all further changes impossible. As a young man, I was a Baptist. I attended the Catholic Church often with a boyhood friend. Later on, I studied Christian Science briefly, took a long look into theosophy, and ended up by making a survey of all religions whose literatures were available to me. With this background and having majored in psychology at school, I arrived in Hawaii in 1917 and took a job teaching because the position would place me near the volcano Kilauea, which was very active at the time and which I proposed to visit as often as possible. After a 3 days voyage in a small steamer out of Honolulu, I at last reached my school. It was one of 3 rooms and stood in a lonely valley between a great sugar plantation and a vast ranch manned by Hawaiians and owned by a white man who had lived most of his life in Hawaii. The 2 teachers under me were both Hawaiian, and it was only natural that I soon began to know more about their simple Hawaiian friends. From the first, I began to hear guarded references to native magicians, the kahunas, or keepers of the secret. My curiosity became aroused, and I began to ask questions. To my surprise, I found that questions were not welcomed. Behind native life, there seemed to lie a realm of secret and private activities, which were no business of a curious outsider. Furthermore, I learned that kahunas had been outlawed since early days when the Christian missionaries became the ruling element in the islands, and all activities of the kahunas and their clients were strictly sub rosa, at least, insofar as a white man was concerned. Rebuffs only whetted my appetite for this strange fare which tasted largely of black superstition, but was constantly spiced to tongue-burning proportions by what appeared to be eyewitness accounts of both the impossible and the preposterous. Ghosts walked scandalously, and they were not confined to the ghosts of deceased Hawaiians. The lesser gods walked as well, and Pele, goddess of the volcanoes, was suspected repeatedly of visiting the natives both by day and by night, in the disguise of a strange old woman never seen before in these parts, and given to asking for tobacco, which she got instantly and without question. Then there were accounts of healing through the use of magic, of magical killings of people guilty of hurting their fellows, and strangest of all to me, the use of magic to investigate the future of individuals and, if it was not good, change it for the better. This last practice had a Hawaiian name, but was best described to me as make luck business. I had not come up through the hard school and was inclined to look with a suspicious eye on anything that savored superstition. This attitude was reinforced when I received from the Honolulu Library the loan of several books which told what there was to tell about the kahunas. From all accounts, and these had been written almost entirely by the missionaries who had arrived in Hawaii less than a century earlier, the kahunas were a set of evil scoundrels who preyed on the superstitions of the natives. Before the arrival of the missionaries in 1820, there had been great stone platforms throughout the 8 islands with grotesque wooden idols and stone altars, even where even human sacrifices were made. There were idols peculiar to each temple and locality. The chiefs had their own personal idols very often, as the famous conqueror of all islands, Kamehameha the First, had this hideous war god with staring eyes and shark's teeth. Now I'm just going to pause here and apologize for mispronouncing some of these words, some of these names. Hope you'll forgive me. Hope you'll have tolerance for this. Now we're going to continue. Near my school is a district where I was later to teach. There had stood an extra-large temple from which each year the priests set forth in procession, carrying the gods for a vacation trip through the countryside and collecting tribute. One of the outstanding features of the idol worship was the amazing set of taboos imposed by the kahunas. Almost nothing at all could be done without the lifting of a taboo and the permission of the priests. As the priests had been backed by the chiefs, the commoners had a difficult time of it. In fact, so great had the imposition of the priests become that the year before the arrival of the missionaries, the head kahuna of all of them, Hua by name, asked the old queen and the young reigning prince for permission to destroy the idols, break the taboos to the last one, and forbid the kahunas their practices. The permission was granted, and all kahunas of goodwill joined in burning the gods, which they had always known were only wood and feathers. The books provided fascinating reading. The high priest, Hua, had evidently been a man of parts. He had possessed psychic powers and had been able to look into the future to the extent that he could advise Kamehameha the First wisely through a campaign that lasted years and ended with the conquering of all other chiefs and the uniting of the islands under one rule. Hua was an excellent example of the type of Hawaiians of the upper class who possessed a most surprising ability to absorb new ideas and react to them. This class amazed the world by stepping out of a grass skirt into all the vestments of civilization in less than one generation. Hua seemed to have hardly spent 5 years in the making of his personal transition from native customs and ways of thought to those of the white men of the day. But he made one bad mistake in the process. When conservative old Kamehameha died, Hua set to work to look into the future, and what he saw intrigued him greatly. He saw white men and their wives arriving in Hawaii to tell the Hawaiians of their god. He saw the spot on a certain beach on one of the 8 islands where they would land to meet the royalty. To a high priest, this was most important. Evidently, he made inquiries of the white seamen then in the islands and was told that the white priests that the white priests worshipped Jesus, who had taught them to perform miracles, even to raising the dead, and that Jesus had risen from the dead after 3 days. Undoubtedly, the account was properly embroidered for the benefit of the Hawaiians. Convinced that the white men had superior ways, guns, ships, and machines, Hua took it for granted that they had a superior form of magic. Realizing the contamination that had overtaken temple Kahunaism in the islands. Okay, let me start the sentence again. Realizing the contamination that had overtaken temple Kahunaism in the islands, he promptly decided to clear the stage against the arrival of the white kahunas. He acted at once, and the temples were all in ruins when, on an October day in 1820, at the very spot on the very beach where Hua had pointed out to his friends and the royal family. The missionaries from New England came ashore. Hua met them on the beach and recited to them a fine rhyming prayer of welcome which he had composed in their honor. In the prayer he mentioned a sufficient part of the native magic in veiled terms to show that he was a magician of no mean powers. And then he went on to welcome the new priests and their gods from far high places. Official visits with royalty finished, and the missionaries assigned to various islands with permission to begin their work. Hua elected to go with the group assigned to Honolulu. He had already found himself in a rather tight box, however, because it was soon developed that white kahunas possessed no magic at all. They were as helpless as the wooden gods which had been burned. The blind and sick and halt had been brought before them and had been taken away, still blind, still sick, and still halt. Something was amiss. The kahunas had been able to do much better than that, idols or no idols. It developed that the white kahunas needed temples. Hopefully, Hua and his men set to work to help build a temple. It was a fine, large one made of cut stone, and it took a long time to complete. But when at last it was done and dedicated, the missionaries still could not heal, to say nothing of raising the dead as they were supposed to do. Hua had fed the missionaries and befriended them endlessly. His name appeared frequently in their letters and journals, but soon after the church at Waiohino was finished, his name was erased from the pages of the missionary reports. He had been urged to join the church and become a convert. He had refused, and we can only suppose went back to the use of such magic as he knew and ordered his fellow kahunas back to their healing practices. A few years later, what with Christianity, hymn singing and reading and writing being accepted by the chiefs in their rapid stride into civilized states, the missionaries outlawed the kahunas. They remained outlawed, but as no Hawaiian police officer or magistrate in his right mind dared arrest a kahuna known to have genuine power, the use of magic continued merrily behind the backs of the whites, so to speak. Meantime, schools were established, and the Hawaiians slid with incredible speed from savagery into civilization, going to church on a Sunday, singing and praying as loudly as the next, and on Monday, going to the deacon, who might be a kahuna on weekdays, to be healed or to have their future changed if they had found themselves in the midst of a run of bad luck. In isolated districts, the kahunas practiced their arts openly. At the volcano, several of them continued to make the ritual offerings to Pele and acted as guides for tourists on the side, often astounding them with a certain magical feat of which I shall tell in detail very soon. And I'm going to pause here. This is in the middle of chapter 1. And I hope you're enjoying this. Max Freedom Long wrote many books, and I own 3 of them. And I'd like to read them here on YouTube. So if you have an interest, or if you have some particular book you'd like me to read, please let me know. Also, if you have any comments on this, please leave them below. And I would ask you to subscribe, because I'm trying to build a spiritual channel here. And like my video, if indeed you do like it. I'm certainly enjoying this book, The Secret Science Behind Miracles, and I hope you'll join me soon. The Secret Science Behind Miracles by Max Freedom Long, Chapter 1. In California, I continued half-heartedly to watch for any new psychological discovery that might again open up the problem. None came. Then, in 1935, quite unexpectedly, I awakened in the middle of the night with an idea that led directly to the clue, which was eventually to give the answer. If Dr. Brigham had been alive, he certainly would have joined me in a scarlet flush of embarrassment. Both of us had overlooked a clue so simple and so obvious that it had continually passed unnoticed. It was the pair of spectacles pushed up on the forehead while we hunted for hours, unable to find them. The idea that struck me in the middle of the night was that the kahunas must have had names for the elements in their magic. Without such names, they could not have handed down their lore from one generation to the next. As the language they used was Hawaiian, the words must have appeared in that language. And as the missionaries began making the Hawaiian English Dictionary as early as 1820, the one still in use, and as they certainly had not known enough about the native magic to translate correctly any names used to describe that magic, it was obvious that any attempted translations would have been either faulty or entirely wrong. The Hawaiian language is made up of words which have been built from short root words. A translation of the roots will usually give the original meaning of the word. Presto! I would find the words used by the kahunas in recorded chants and prayers and make a fresh translation of them from the roots. On the following morning, I recalled the fact that everyone agreed in Hawaii that the kahunas had taught that man had two spirits, or souls. No one paid the slightest attention to this patently erroneous belief. How could a man have two souls? What absurdity! What dark superstition! So I handed up the two words, naming the two souls. As I suspected, they were both there in my copy of the old dictionary which had come off the presses in 1865, some years after the discovery of mesmerism, during the early days of psychical research, and a full 2 decades before the birth of our infant science of psychology. The dictionary said, Unihippoly, the leg and arm bones of a person. Unihippoly was the name of one class of gods called Akuanoho. Omakua was another, and they were the departed spirits of deceased persons. Yuhane, the soul, the spirit of a person, the ghost or spirit of a deceased person. Note, the Hawaiians supposed that men had two souls each, that one died with the body and the other lived on, either visible or invisible as might be, but had no more connection with the person deceased than his shadow. These ghosts could talk, cry, complain, etc. There were those supposed to be skillful in entrapping or catching them. And then there's a footnote here. It says, in the pronunciation of Hawaiian words, the sound of the vowels is that used in Latin. A as in father, E as in E as long A in ale, I as long E in enough, AI as long I in isle, ISLE, U as in oo as in moon, O as in long O in over, W almost like V. Uhane is pronounced Uhane. Unihippoly is pronounced Unihipili. Unihipili. Okay, so I said it a bit wrong before. Omakua is pronounced Aumakua. Aumakua. Interesting. All right. I do apologize once again for mispronouncing some of these words. I'll do my best here. That's all I can do. Anyway, continuing now. It was apparent that the earnest missionaries had consulted the Hawaiians to ascertain the meanings of these two words and had been giving conflicting information, which they had done their best to order and include the translations. The outstanding feature of the Unihipili was that it seemed to be connected with the arms and legs very definitely, and besides that, it was a spirit. The Uhane was also a spirit, but it was a ghost who could talk even as if it were hardly more than a shadow in connection with the person of the deceased. As the first word was longer and had most roots, I began to work on it to get a root translation. There were 7 roots in the word, counting overlaps of letters, and some of these roots had as many as 10 meanings. My task to sort meanings to see if I could find any that could apply to the magic used by the kahunas. Here was my haystack before me, and all I needed was to find the needle. It seemed rather promising. I remembered Dr. Brigham's injunction to watch always for the consciousness involved in firewalking and other magic, for the force used to produce the magical result, and for the visible or invisible physical substance through which the force might act. Yes, I would try to find 3 needles, and I did find them eventually. The first 2 before the year was out, and the last one 6 years later. What I found immediately and almost before lunchtime was that the subconscious was the subconscious, but not as we know it. The subconscious of the magicians was twice as large and 3 times as natural. I was so surprised by the discovery that I went down for a full count of 10. It was incredible that the kahunas could have known the subconscious, but the evidence was undeniable. Here is how the roots describe the spirits named in the words Unihipili and Uhane. Both are spirits, in brackets, root U, and this root means to grieve. So both spirits were able to grieve, but the root Hane, Hane, in Uhane means to talk. So the spirit named in this word could talk. As only human beings talk, this spirit must be a human one. That raises the question as to the nature of the other spirit. It can grieve, and so can animals. It may not be a man who can talk, but at least it is an animal-like spirit that can grieve. The Uhane cried and talked weakly. Weakly being Weakly. In the dictionary note, it was said to be considered nothing more than a shadow connected with the deceased person. Evidently, it was a weak and not very substantial talking spirit. Unihipili, with the alternate spelling of Uhinipili, gives more roots to translate. Combined to get a spirit which can grieve but may not be able to talk, in brackets, U, just the letter U. It is something that covers up something else and hides it, or it is itself hidden as by a cover or veil, in brackets, UHI. It is a spirit which accompanies another, is joined to it, is sticky and sticks or adheres to it. It attaches itself to another and acts as its servant, in brackets, PILI. It is a spirit which does things secretly, silently, and very carefully, but does not do certain things because it's afraid of offending the gods, in brackets, Nihi. It is a spirit that can protrude from something, can rise up from something, and which can also draw something out of something, as a coin from a pocket. It desires certain things most earnestly. It is stubborn and unwilling, disposed to refuse to do as told. It tinctures or impregnates or mixes completely with something else. It is connected with the slow dripping of water, or with the manufacture and exudation of nourishing water, as the breast water or milk of the mother, in brackets, U in its several meanings. Note, later on I was to learn that water is the symbol of the human electrovital force. So there was one needle. The two conscious spirits of man are 2/3 of the other needle, but the third is only hinted at in the meaning of sticky or to adhere. To summarize, the kahuna idea of the conscious and subconscious seems to be, judging from the root meanings of the names given them, a pair of spirits closely joined in a body which is controlled by the subconscious and used to cover and hide them both. The conscious spirit is more human and possesses the ability to talk. The grieving subconscious weeps tears, dribbles water, and otherwise handles the vital force of the water. No, let me read the sentence again. The grieving subconscious weeps tears, dribbles water, and otherwise handles the vital force of the body. It does its work with secrecy and silent care, but it is stubborn and disposed to refuse to obey. It refuses to do things when it fears the gods, in brackets, holds a complex or fixation of ideas, close bracket. And it intermingles or tinctures the conscious spirit to give the impression of being one with it. Open bracket. The use made in magic of the sticky element as a symbol and the ability to protrude or to draw something out of something else will become clear later. Close bracket. Given the certainty that the kahunas had known for thousands of years all the psychology we have come to know in the last few years, I became quite sure that their ability to perform feats of magic stemmed from their knowledge of important psychological factors not yet discovered by us. It soon became apparent that in naming the elements of psychology and placing in their word root symbol meanings to point to related elements, the kahunas of the dawn days had done a superb job. The only great stumbling block was the fact that the symbol words stood for elements whose nature I could not imagine. Searching feverishly for the meanings of these symbols, I returned to the reports on psychic phenomena, and as I checked each type of phenomena in turn, endeavored to locate the counterpart symbol in the roots of the terms used by the kahunas. And I'm going to pause here. I'm finding this very interesting. I hope you are too. And I hope you will subscribe and like and join me next time. Till soon. The Secret Science Behind Miracles by Max Freedom Long. Chapter 1. After a few months, it became plain that I had gone as far as I could in the first work of matching the more complete psychology with the external rites of kahuna magic. I decided that what I found was too valuable to keep from the world, and forthwith wrote a report of my findings and the kahuna lore in general. And then there's a footnote here, and it says, Recovering the Ancient Magic, published by Ryder and Company, London, 1936. The English publication brought me many letters. I had placed my name and address in the back of the report and had requested any reader who could offer pertinent information for the study to write to me. Almost no really helpful information arrived, although hundreds of letters contained speculative material and guesses. Then, over a year after the publication of that book, there came a letter from a retired English journalist. His name was William Reginald Stewart, and what he had to say was very much to the point. In my report, he had been greatly interested to find that I was describing the same magic that he, in his younger days, had found being used by a certain Berber tribe in the Atlas Mountains of North Africa. Also, to his surprise, he found that the Hawaiian words used by the kahunas were the same, except for dialect differences, as those which had been used to describe the magic in Africa. He had, after reading my book, hunted up his yellowed notes and compared words which he had been told belonged to a secret magical language. The Hawaiian word kahuna appeared as Quahuna, Quahuna, among the Berbers, and the Hawaiian term for woman kahuna was changed from kahuna wahine to Quahini, Quahini. The word for a god was nearly the same in both language, Aqua and Atua, as were a number of other words we checked. As the Berber tribes spoke a language not at all related to the Polynesian dialects, the discovery of the similarities of the magic and the language used to describe it offered definite proof that the two peoples had either come from the same original stock or had been in contact with each other in ancient times. Stewart had heard tales of this Berber tribe and their magician while exploring for oil signs for a Dutch company and corresponding for the Christian Science Monitor as a freelance writer and authority on North Africa. Taking a vacation, he hired guides and set out to find the tribe. Eventually he did find it and met a magician, a woman. By dint of much persuasion, he got himself adopted and made her blood son so that he could become eligible to receive training in the secret magic. The magician, whose name was Lucci, Lucchi, had a daughter, age 17, who was just beginning to take the training, so Stewart was allowed to join in. The training began with her explanations of legendary tribal history, in which it was related that 12 tribes of the people having kahunas once lived in the Sahara Desert, when it was still a green and fertile land of flowing rivers. The rivers dried up and the tribes moved into the valley of the Nile. While there, they used their magic to help cut, carry, and place the building stones of the Great Pyramid. At that time, they were rulers in Egypt and topped all others because of their magic. The account continued with a recital of how it was foreseen that a time of intellectual darkness was due in the world, and that the secret of their magic was in danger of being lost. To preserve it, for it was as precious as it was secret, the 12 tribes decided to hunt for isolated islands to which they might go to preserve the secret, in brackets, Huna, until the time was ripe for its return to the world. 11 of the tribes, after making a psychic exploration and finding the islands of the Pacific empty and waiting, moved off by way of canal to the Red Sea, and thence along either the African coast or over to India, and thence into the Pacific. After many years, they became lost in quotes, insofar as the 12th tribe was concerned. This 12th tribe had, for some unstated reason, decided to go north and settle in the Atlas Mountain fastnesses. They had lived there for centuries, always preserving the secret and using its magic, but as modern times arrived, the kahunas had died out, and only one remained. She was the teacher, Luchi. Stewart found the Berber tribe hospitable, clean, very intelligent, and in possession of a fine old culture. They spoke a conglomerate language peculiar to the Berber tribes, but when it came to teaching the ancient lore of magic, another language had to be employed, because in it alone could be found the proper words to name the elements in man which made magic possible. The young Englishman was already hampered by language difficulties, having to match his French with that of some of the Berbers, and having to delve endlessly to arrive at a proper understanding of what words in so-called secret language might mean. Little by little, he learned the basic philosophy of magic. His teacher made many demonstrations of her magic in healing and in the control of birds, beasts, serpents, and weather. All was going well indeed, and the theoretical work had been covered, and its practical application was about to follow. Then, on a misty afternoon, 2 raiding parties in the valley below the Berber camp began shooting at each other. A stray bullet struck Luchi over the heart, and she died almost instantly. Left without a teacher, and with Luchi's daughter knowing no more than he did, Stewart's training came to an abrupt end. He gathered up his notes, took leave of his blood brothers and sisters, and returned to his old rounds. It was 30 years later that he read my report and recognized the Hawaiian words that I mentioned as the same words, aside from the dialect changes, which he had preserved so long ago in his notes. This linked up the Hawaiian kahunas with North Africa and possibly with Egypt. Hawaiian legends contained the oral history of the people. In these, it is told that the Hawaiians once lived in a homeland far away. They saw by psychic sight the land of Hawaii and set out to find it. Their journey commenced at the Red Sea of Cain, which fits neatly into the idea that they came from Egypt by way of the Red Sea, as it is called to this day, in at least 3 languages. The history gives few details of the journey from that place on, except to tell how progress was made from land to land in large double canoes. When the 8 unoccupied islands of Hawaii were found by the scouts who went ahead, they returned to the nearest islands to the west to fetch the others of the tribe who had remained there to rest. Trees, plants, and animals were brought on subsequent voyages as the tribe moved in and took up its home in Hawaii. The voyages to the outside islands stopped for a long time and complete isolation reigned. Then the royal blood ran out, and a voyage to the other islands was made to find and bring back a prince of high blood. He brought with him his favorites and a kahuna. This kahuna, if we can credit the account, introduced into Hawaii a contaminated form of kahunaism, which contained little magic and commanded idol worship and temple building. This contamination remained with its idols and temples, even though kahunas possessing knowledge of the workable and practical magic continued their work and preserved the secret in almost uncontaminated form. Attempts by scholars to trace Hawaiian origins through language and customs have been none too successful. There are 11 tribes of Polynesians, all speaking dialects of the same language, but having words, customs, and beliefs easily identified as of Indian origin. On the other hand, Polynesian words may be found scattered all the way from the Pacific to the Near East. Madagascar has them, indicating the early contact with the people who spoke Polynesian language. Even in Japan may be found Polynesian words and ideas. In India, a number of ideas connected with the kahuna magic are to be seen, greatly changed, and now of no practical use, but still pointing in the same general direction. With the invaluable help of Stuart, and by making full use of what he had learned in North Africa, I was able to continue the research. Little by little, the secret was reconstructed as its symbols and practices were matched against the observations made of the external acts or rites of the kahunas by Dr. Brigham, and in a lesser degree by me. It would, however, have been utterly impossible to grasp the meanings of words and the significance of rites had modern psychology and psychical research not already made certain basic discoveries upon which to rest fuller structures. Religions also played an invaluable part because in them I found the battered remains of the original Huna philosophy. These remains, misshapen as they were, gave hints as where to look for certain bits of information and helped to verify other uncertain materials as they came to light. Soon after the publication of my report in England, I had entered into correspondence with a priest of the Church of England who had written me upon reading my book and who was carrying on psychological studies of mental and spiritual healing. His interest in the kahuna lore grew, and shortly after my contact with Stuart, the clergyman and a group of his associates decided to try some of the healing magic of the kahunas. This they did after much writing back and forth. They were especially successful in obsessional cases. The family of a patient who was healed offered to supply money for extensive experimental work, and the clergyman and the three of his group made the journey to California to spend some time with me in discussing the best ways to proceed. They left me all plans complete, even to a blueprint of the building to be erected. But on their way back to England, World War II broke out, and the plans were dropped. With the war over, the funds are no longer available, and the healing group is scattered. Such experimental work as has been done has gone far to prove that the reconstruction of the Huna system is sufficiently complete to be workable in the hands of individuals owning certain natural talents and able to give sufficient time to learning to use the system. Steady and continued practice under proper guidance seems to be the main thing needed. In Hawaii, there is a little or no dependable literature covering the kahunas. What little there is available in books and articles and pamphlets misses entirely the basic mechanisms of which I report. Each writer contradicts the other, and the muddle is never resolved. My own studies and those of Dr. Brigham are almost unknown in the islands, and copies of my first report are kept carefully locked away in the library of Honolulu, being brought out only if requested by one who knows that it is there. Because of misconceptions, and because there was formerly a very real danger in the death prayer, the general attitude of the residents is one which encourages denial of kahuna magic, or failing that, a policy of letting sleeping dogs lie. With these introductory remarks, I will now proceed with the task of presenting the Huna system with all its details and with the available proofs of its correctness as a workable set of scientific facts. And that concludes Chapter 1. Chapter 2 is entitled Firewalking as an Introduction to Magic. And I hope you're enjoying this. And please subscribe and Till soon.